You know what? Let's just, I'll just pick up where with abortion. Leslie, I just got finished spending 10 minutes covering a bunch of stuff about children. I'm sorry you missed that, but we will at least cover abortion. So basically what Rothbard says is that a woman has a right to evict a trespasser. So if she doesn't want the baby inside her, she's not required to keep it there. Now, Walter Block, who is another famous libertarian and happens to still be alive, whereas Rothbard's been dead for 20 some years, presented a slightly different argument. He said that, that we'll start by granting that the right to life argument, that a baby is a human being at conception, and that you can't kill a human being. So the analogy that Block uses is that, you know, if you have a trespasser on your property, you don't have a right to kill that trespasser, at least not right off the bat, right? If somebody's in your yard, some stranger's in your yard, you don't just haul out the 12 gauge, run out there and blow them away, right? You start by saying, well, this is my property, would you please leave, right? If you were to just blow them away with a 12 gauge or something, then, you know, that would actually be a problem, right? You can't do that. So you have a right to evict the trespasser, but you don't necessarily have a right to kill them, especially if they're not exhibiting aggressive or threatening behavior. Right? I mean, if they're just sort of standing there staring at the clouds, you might not have any right to kill them at all, right? You might have a right to push them off your property or something like that, but you don't have a right to kill somebody who's just standing on a corner of your lawn while, you know, telling jokes or something, you know? Yeah. So the same thing with abortion, right? The woman has a right to kill the child, to evict the child from her body, but she doesn't have a right to kill it. So how does that actually play out in practice? Well, with the current state of medical science, a baby evicted from his mother's body, probably in the first, I'm not sure of the exact where medical science is right now, but, you know, certainly probably in the first 2 trimesters, a baby that's aborted is going to die. We don't have the technology and the knowledge to know how to keep that baby alive. Now, if I'm off by a month one way or the other, just forgive me, okay? But you get the idea that there's some sort of threshold where a baby removed from its mother's body can survive, and anything prior to that, the baby's probably going to die. So under this idea, the mother has a right to remove the baby, but not to do anything to kill it. And if the fetus is viable outside the womb, the mother can't do anything to cause it to die. And she's under an obligation to allow anyone else who would want to care and take care of that baby and keep it alive to allow them to do so. Right? She can't do anything to deliberately kill that baby. So this preserves the right of the mother to her body, and it also preserves the right to life to the fetus, contingent on the fetus's own ability to survive, given whatever assistance is available to it. So now, I want to be clear. I am not necessarily arguing for any of these positions. I'm simply presenting different libertarian approaches that are consistent with the principles that we've talked about. Libertarians disagree on this question. You know, there's room for disagreement. So if you don't like what I've said, that's totally cool. I get it. I don't like all of this myself. I'm not sure there is a solution to the question of abortion. You know, this libertarianism doesn't promise to answer every single question. It just provides us with principles and values that we can apply in an effort to try to work these things out. And as I said, people have their moral beliefs and so forth, and under libertarianism, you know, you're allowed to exercise those moral beliefs in your own life, and you're also allowed to advocate for them to others.
So what does libertarian say about abortion?
Well, basically it says that there is no one libertarian position on abortion. Okay, there is none. I'm presenting one position that a libertarian has, just to be clear.
And what was it again? So I'm confused.
Right. So it is that the mother has the right to evict the trespasser. And of course, I don't really like using that word trespasser, but that is, in the worst case, what a fetus might be to a mother. I hope it doesn't happen that way, but let's face it, there are some women that feel that way about that fetus. And, you know, that's their opinion. That's how they feel about it. That's how they feel. I mean, you know, you can not like it, but that's what's so. So a mother has a right to evict the trespasser, but not to kill it.
So what does that mean right there? That's where I don't. That's where I'm kind of losing my understanding.
Well, it is possible to remove under many circumstances. It's possible to remove a fetus from a mother without killing it. Now, there are also abortion procedures that deliberately kill the fetus, or at least usually do, right? So under this approach that this libertarian, his name's Professor Walter Block, wonderful, look him up on the internet. He's got tons of great stuff. He's written a lot of books. He's one of the most published libertarian authors, maybe the most published libertarian author ever. Great guy. He says, well, you know, the mother doesn't have a right to kill the fetus. And one of the advantages of this is that this encourages those who are opposed to abortion to push and fund and support research in keeping early term fetuses alive, right? Because see, like 100 years ago, I mean, any baby removed from its mother, except maybe in the last month of pregnancy, would die, right? Now, as it is now, that has been pushed way back. Babies removed from their mothers can be kept alive much earlier in term. Yes? I don't know, again, I'm not a medical expert, but I would suppose it would be at least 2 months, maybe more. Yeah?
Yeah, premature babies.
Premature babies, right. So what people who are opposed to one of the things under this scheme that people opposed to abortion would want to do is to support the advancement of medicine in the area of keeping early term fetuses alive. So that's something that we can do. And of course, there has been progress made in that, as I just said, but there can be more. There's definitely room for improvement there. So this is one libertarian's approach. And the effort here is to try to apply the right of self-ownership to both the mother and the fetus. So the fetus doesn't, under this scheme, the fetus doesn't have a right to life at the expense of the mother. That's the key thing, right? Now, most mothers are more than happy, thankfully, to contribute, their bodies to the development of the fetus, right? We wouldn't be here. But there are a few mothers who feel otherwise, and we have to think about how libertarian principles would be right, or natural law would be rightly applied to those cases. These are edge cases, what we call edge cases, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of mothers, there's a lot of abortions in this country. So under this scheme, we could have fewer and fewer babies dying as a result of abortion, because mothers and doctors would not be allowed to kill a fetus. They would not, however, have to do anything to keep it alive either. So screams, comments, questions, what do we have on this? I'll go to mute so I can hear. Okay, so I will move on to the next topic. I want to briefly cover animals. The rights, do animals have rights? Well, under most theories of natural rights, animals do not have rights. Of course, that doesn't mean that libertarians want animals to be abused or mistreated. It simply means that they don't have natural rights. They are property.
Like freedom of speech. Shut up.
Yeah, they don't have, they don't own their lives. They are property. Now, once again, this does not mean people can't have moral codes or religious codes or just gut feelings about how animals ought to be treated. And in a libertarian society, they would be free to worship animals. They'd be free to, run around advocating for animal rights, even though they don't have them. And I would say that, in the instance of abuse or maltreatment of an animal, that libertarians would, one thing that a libertarian could do is offer to buy the animal, either themselves or in a group. Libertarians could form a group of people that would pool their funds and invest those funds like a foundation, and then when an animal was being mistreated, they could offer to simply purchase the animal and take it away. They'd also be free to boycott or ostracize someone who mistreated animals. So, for example, if you think cockfights are a mistreatment of animals, they're cruel to animals, you can not do business, not either buy or sell from that person, and you can advocate to others that they not do that either, that they refrain from any commerce with that person. And in fact, you can also advocate that they be ostracized. In other words, you simply don't have any relationship with that person whatsoever. You ice them out of your life, right? So those are ways of non-coercively, without using aggression, without initiating force or threatening to initiate force, that you can exert influence and persuasion on people who are mistreating animals without violating the non-aggression principle or their property rights. Yeah? Okay. All right. So now, one of the things that came up on Telegram today, thanks to Carrie and Leslie, was the question of anarchism. And so what I want to do now is move on and talk about different forms of government, including anarchism. I'm going to start by talking about some of the problems of the government we have now and the problems of minarchism. I'm also going to make some comparisons between democracy and monarchy. One thing, Aurea, I didn't start a timer. Can you let me know a few minutes before the recording runs out? We're going to take a 5-minute break about halfway through because the recording has to be restarted, and that'll give people a chance to go to the restroom.
There's a timer that says 33 minutes.
Oh yeah, right, there is a timer. Okay, so as we near an hour here, we will take a 5-minute break. So the founding fathers, the American founding fathers, seemed to create through the Constitution a minimal small government, right? So basically the idea was to create a government which would arbitrate matters between the states, right? Disputes between the states, that would conduct a national defense, an army and a navy, that would resolve the existing national debt, and do a few other things like establish a money that would be used across all the states and set weights and standards to be used across all the states. So that was kind of the minarchist, what we call minarchism. So anarchism is without rule, and minarchism is with a little rule. Now, where is the line between a lot of rule and a little rule? That's actually not really clear. It's kind of a matter of opinion. But basically, minarchism would be what I just described. Some people have called it the night watchman state. So the night watchman state would be just the minimum amount of security and defense and justice. So government's going to run the courts, they're going to have a police force, they're going to have an army and a navy, and they're going to maybe, like in the Constitution, it says that they can construct roads for postal purposes, to allow the mail to move and so forth. So, maybe a minimum amount of infrastructure. The Constitution also really doesn't allow the government to own much in the way of property, except for arsenals, and, for its army, and a few what they call needful buildings. It certainly doesn't allow the government to own vast stretches of undeveloped land. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows the government to do that. So that would be minarchism. So what is the problem of minarchism? Minarchism says that competition is desirable except in certain things, right? So it's okay to have competition in the provision of food, housing, clothes, and other things. But we don't want, for some reason, we don't want competition in the provision of police functions. We want a monopoly there. We want a monopoly in the provision of defense, national defense. We want a monopoly in the provision of justice, courts, and so forth. Is that really so? Do we really want a monopoly there? If so, even in money, do we want a monopoly in money? in, you know, what our money is, what we use for money, how it's managed. Do we need a monopoly in the matter even of weights and measures? So it is, you know, there is an argument that there's an advantage to a pound to Daniel is the same weight as a pound to me. Because then when we go to trade and Daniel says, I got a pound of bananas for you, Frank, and I bring it over here and weigh it over here, you know, I still get a pound and we don't have a dispute, right? But is it necessary to have a monopoly to establish that? Then there is the problem of public goods. So public goods are non-excludable. In other words, you can't, one of the arguments for a monopoly in police function is that when police patrol, they can't skip your house, right? They're patrolling the whole neighborhood. So what they're doing contributes to everybody. And therefore, everybody should have to pay. And that there's no real reason to have competition in that, because you know, we'll just have these guys do all the patrolling that's necessary. So public goods, and another, but the problems of minarchism, there's a lot of problems. One of them is basically what they're saying is we're going to protect your rights by violating your rights. All right? We're going to say you can't go anywhere else for the arbitration of your disputes. You have to do that with us. And we're going to set the price for that. We're going to protect you, but we're going to set the price for that protection. And if you don't pay, we throw you in jail. So that's a violation of your rights, right? Because you have a right in property, and that nobody has a right to take that from you without your consent. So the problem is the idea of minarchism actually contradicts itself. It says we're going to protect your rights, but first we have to violate them, right? We have to say, we have to have taxation. We might even have to have conscription. We might have to force you, you know, in order to protect you, we might have to force you to serve in the army. So we'll protect your property, but we'll do that by taking your property and by threatening force around that. So if you don't give us some of your property, some of your wealth, some of your income, some of your savings, whatever, then your property, you forfeit your property, all of your property. Yeah? If you don't pay your property tax, what happens to your house? You lose it. If you don't pay your income tax, what happens to your income? They take it. Right? So a system that violates your rights on the pretext of protecting them is very, very dubious. And also, they're going to set the price of their protection, right? So they can increase that price whenever they want, and they can also say, this is how much protection you'll get for your money. So you don't get to say how often the police patrol your neighborhood. You don't get to say that. You just get to pay for it. Whatever they tell you to pay, that's what you pay. And whatever patrols they give you, that's what they give you. Another problem with government in general, and this includes minarchism, is that in the words of another libertarian, his name isn't coming to me, Rick Rule. He says, government demands rape. And he's talking about the rate of resources. So government creates goods or services which are held in common, right? They don't belong to any one person or one company or anything. They belong to all of us in common. So what is the problem with goods or services held in common? Well, there's an old parable called the parable of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons in Old England was an area, and we used to have that here in this part of the country as well, an area of the town where people could graze their cattle, right? So you could graze some cattle and I could graze cattle there. It was held in common. It was commonly held grazing land. So what was the problem with the commons? Was that it was a finite resource. And the more each person used of it, the more benefit they got. But as each person used more and more of it, it would be destroyed. I think I'm getting some feedback. So more and more of it would be destroyed, or it would be destroyed because it would be overgrazed. So everyone has an incentive to graze their cattle as much as possible, to get as much out of it as they can, knowing that if they don't graze their cattle there, someone else will, right? So the destruction of this resource is actually inevitable. There's no way to stop it, because if I don't graze my cattle there, you will, and it will be destroyed anyway. So even knowing that grazing my cattle there will destroy, too many cattle there will destroy it, I'll do it anyway, because I know that it will be done by somebody. It might as well be me, and then I get the benefit. I get some of the benefit. So the tragedy of the commons is the rape of the resource, of a commonly held resource. An example that you can see out there to some extent right now is roads, right? So roads are held in common. Most roads are not owned privately. So the more you use the roads, the more benefit you get from them. And that's true of everyone else as well. Well, one of the results of that is extreme levels of traffic congestion, right? So the quality of the resource is vastly diminished. Its usability is impaired, right? We can't drive, we can't get where we want to go. The roads are there, but we can't really make effective use of them because of traffic and congestion. So this is an example of the tragedy of the commons, destroying, or in this case, just dramatically reducing how usable the resource is, at least at certain times. And of course, in some parts of the world, traffic is much worse than it is here in Albuquerque. All right, so those are some of the problems of minarchism. Lack of competition, the inherent conflict of violating our rights in order to protect them, the tragedy of the commons. Anybody else see anything else about minarchism that could be a problem? I would say one of the problems that's real obvious is that it's very difficult to keep a small government small. Yeah? There's no real way to do that. The Constitution attempted to limit government, and it did in many ways do that. There were a couple of problems. One was that there's always different interpretations of a text, right? There's always different ways to interpret any text. You can't write anything that can't be interpreted differently by different people. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Constitution, the government is its own arbitrator, right? We said one of the definitions of government is that government is the ultimate arbitrator of all disputes in a given geographical area, including disputes involving itself. So if there is a dispute with the government about the limitations placed upon it by the Constitution, who's going to arbitrate that dispute? The government. And they're in their own self-interest, assuming their own self-interest is at work, which is a pretty safe argument, right? I mean, you know, if I'm a judge in my own case, I'm probably going to decide the case in my favor most of the time, right? And so, you know, the government consistently or usually decides any disputes involving limitations placed upon it by the Constitution in its own favor. And as those decisions accumulate, the government accretes more and more power. Another way that a minarchist government accretes power is through war. So in war, governments generally don't have to abide by their usual limitations. And so they make new rules, new laws, and do new things that expand their power under the aegis of emergency. Yeah? And then when the war is over, they don't rescind all of those new powers. They may rescind some of them, but they don't rescind all of them. And so each war starts from a higher plateau of government power, adds more for the war, and then takes it down. I'll bring my hand down here, takes it down a little bit, and then the next war, it goes up again. At the war's over, it comes down, and they keep going up and up. It's another fabulous libertarian, Robert Higgs, called the ratchet effect of government power. And the United States has been in a lot of wars. I mean, you know, this has been a very, very war-like country. It was founded on war. It was involved in war almost from the start, and it's just accelerated to where now, in the last 50 years or so, we've been at war pretty much continuously, and the end is not in sight. We're still in the longest war we've ever fought, not the longest war ever, but the longest war we've ever fought, 20 years in Afghanistan. And the way it looks now, if we left, the very people we wanted to remove from power would resume power, the Taliban. We went in there to get them out of power. If we left now, the Taliban would be in power next week. So it's been a complete waste of trillions of dollars and about 2,400 American lives that we've lost there. For what?
2,400 in 20 years?
In Afghanistan. I think that's right. It's 2,400 and change. So, with Minarchism, if you wind up with a standing army, which we did, we wound up with a standing army. A standing army is a temptation to the executive and the government and the legislature as well, is a constant temptation. Because that standing army that has been created by the minarchist government has to justify its existence. And if there's never any war, it can't be justified. So the government almost, in order, if you're going to have a standing army, you almost have to go to war. Otherwise, people won't be willing to pay for that army. All right, so let's look at another alternative to minarchism, and that would be monarchy. So monarchy is ruled by a king, yeah? And it's generally thought that democracy represents an improvement over monarchy. Can anybody tell me why it's thought that democracy is better than monarchy? I will go ahead and mute.
Supposed to be better than monarchy. I'll take a guess.
All right.
No. Because then it's like, doesn't the king have all the power and the money and stuff in the monarchy?
Mm-hmm.
In the democracy, it's like more evenly spread out.
That's good. So what, in case anybody Leslie didn't hear, so what Daniel said was that in a monarchy, the king has all the money and power, and in democracy, the power and the money are more evenly spread out. Is that correct? Good, okay. Anybody else? Good, okay. All right, so let's talk about monarchy versus democracy. So what are the advantages? Let's look at the advantages of monarchy. So one advantage is that a monarch is nominally the owner of the country, whereas a democratically elected leader is more akin to a renter. So let's take this renting example here for a minute. Let's suppose that I have a house. I'm sorry? Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, actually, let's go ahead and take our break now. This is a good place to stop. We'll be back in 5 minutes. That would be 7:25, okay? 7:25. I'm going to go to mute.
I have been trying to comment, but you guys apparently couldn't hear me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't notice your mouth moving.
Oh, well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I gotta think. Okay, back on the abortion issue, I was thinking that, you know, a man and a woman is very aware of natural law and how nature works. So, you know, why I guess I don't know how to, but you know, you have to kind of go with the consequences of nature, I think, is all my comment is on that. I don't find that there's room for other people's, or you know, I don't really know what my thought is of that. It's just that they know what the consequences of natural law are. So I get stuck on that. But I did have another comment on the last question you had, but now I forgot what it was.
Okay, well, when it comes back to you, please, you know, I want to hear it. I want to hear it. And thank you for your feedback about the abortion question. My That is that is an argument I have encountered before. If I understand your argument correctly, what it basically boils down to is that by engaging in intercourse, that the man and the woman are agreeing to be parents if conception is the result. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So as we already talked about, and I guess you actually missed this part of the conversation.
Okay.
Because you couldn't hear me. And that's my fault. I apologize. I had a wrong setting here and I didn't realize it. I should have tested all this stuff before we got started. So if you read Rothbard's chapter 14, and I know you've done that, you know that parents, according to him, that parents do not have a positive obligation to take care of their child. Right?
I don't understand that.
Yeah, so they don't have a positive obligation because no one has a right to live at someone else's expense. Now, this is what Rothbard says. Again, I'm not necessarily asserting this, but I think I do understand his argument and I do appreciate it at some level. So I'm going to go ahead and argue for that. So that's why parents don't have an obligation to their child. So even if the argument that you make that there's some sort of that they, by engaging in intercourse, that they consent to the obligations of parenthood, I would say, according to a strict reading of natural law, there is no such obligation to parenthood. There never is, even after the child is born. So that doesn't mean they can kill the child. It simply means that the child doesn't have a right to life at the expense of the mother or father. Meaning at the cost of their time, money, energy, whatever. Now, most people have a moral code that does obligate them. And I think, obviously that's, a good thing. Most of us wouldn't be here, right?
Well, I mean, isn't natural law, though? It's all about what is moral.
No, it's not. I would say morality and law are two different things.
Well, what do you mean law? Because natural law isn't necessarily, it's a law, it's an unmutable law.
It is law, right? So moral, let's look it up. So moral.
It's not something that was created by man.
Moral is concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. And law, a system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. These are just the first definitions. There are others, of course. So one, we have a system of rules, and the other is principles of right and wrong behavior. So there probably is some overlap, like people want their laws to be moral, and they want their morality to be law, right? But everyone's morality can't be law. Because people do have different ideas about right and wrong and good and bad.
How so?
Well, I mean, you know, one person might think, you know, it's fine for me to drive 80 miles an hour as long as I don't hurt anybody. You could make an argument for that. Another person would say, no, you know, you got to follow the law no matter what. And we'll actually get into that here later because we're going to be talking about social contract theory. So if you were going to make, and I think this is a good question, by the way, Leslie, let's just say, you know, would it be fair to say that why don't we just make everything that's right to do mandatory and everything that's bad to do forbidden? Why don't we just make that the law? Why don't we do that? Why don't we just make a law that says everything good you must do and everything bad you must not do?
Not everybody agrees.
Yeah. You could never make such a body of law unless you gave it to one person to do, which is monarchy. In a monarchy, that's what you do, right? You say, okay, you're the king. You decide what we must do and what we must not do. You decide what's good and what's bad. And you know what usually happens? Well, go ahead, Leslie.
That's a man-made law, though. I'm talking God's laws.
Well, who's to say what God's law is?
Well, I mean, natural law is provable, you know.
Natural law is provable, right? But what is provable, it is not provable that someone has a right to live at someone else's expense. You cannot prove that. And that's why parents don't have a positive obligation to their children. They do have a negative obligation. They can't kill them. But why is it that, so this would really be the question, because I think you'd agree with me, Leslie, that I don't have a right to live at your expense, right? I don't have a right to come and force or threaten to force you to turn over resources to me so that I may live. Yeah? I don't have a right to do that, do I? No. So does that change if I was your child? How does that fundamentally change?
What's that? Oh, how does it?
Yeah, how does that change in terms of natural law?
Well, I believe natural law is governed by love of all people. So I think that's the beginning.
Okay. So is it loving to force somebody to take care of another person at their expense?
No, of course not. But the person that needs help does it out of love, or the person that wants to help does it out of love for your fellow man.
So in this approach, there's nothing to keep a parent from taking care of their child, whether it's out of love or moral obligation or whatever, right? Like they can definitely do that. We're not saying that parents shouldn't take care of their kids. All we're saying is that they don't have a positive obligation to do that. Now, again, I am not speaking for all libertarians here. If you want to disagree with me and call yourself a libertarian anyway, I won't argue with you. Like lots of libertarians find the idea that parents don't have a positive obligation to their children to be just absolutely untenable. They can't stand it. They want to run from the room, some of them. Okay? One of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because I want you to understand libertarian principles And in order to do that, we have to take them and apply them to difficult things, things that are not obvious, right? The simple ones, well, everybody knows, you know, thou shalt not murder. You know, you don't have a right to just walk up and take somebody's life because you don't like the way they dress, right? I don't have the right to force or use force or threaten to use force to require any one of you to turn over resources to me so that I may live, right? Some of that stuff's easy, yeah? I mean, the easy stuff. I assume you get that. I mean, I don't need to sit here and go on for hour after hour about that stuff. It's the hard stuff that really makes us think about what these principles are and how to apply them. And this is hard stuff. And as I said, we don't have to agree. We can be friends. And in fact, we are. As far as I'm concerned, we're good friends. And I know you don't all agree with us. That's fine.
So basically, I think what you're trying to say, or what I'm understanding what you're saying, is the part where a parent is not morally obligated to take care of their kid leaves the option for like foster care, things like that, putting the kid up for adoption, right? Is that what you're saying? That's what the Libertarian is saying, that like not necessarily have the kid throw it in a trash can, but have a kid and there's someone there to adopt it or go to an orphanage. Is that what you're saying? Or do
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. You don't have a right to kill it. Absolutely not. That would be murder, right? But you don't have a right to support or take care of that child, or you don't have an obligation to do so, at least not a legal obligation. Now, you may have a moral obligation, right? And I would say most people do. But if somebody didn't have that moral obligation and didn't take care of their kid, I would say under libertarian law, we couldn't actually punish them for that. Now, that's not to say, again, to go back to some of the ideas we had before, you know, they could be ostracized, and probably would be, I would think, you know, and they could be boycotted. So there's lots of things that could happen to them as a result of not taking care of their kids. The one thing I would say under libertarian law that shouldn't happen is that they be imprisoned or killed, that they have their rights taken away on account of failing to take care of their kids. You know, and in a practical way, you know, you can also make an argument that if somebody doesn't want to take care of their kids, we don't want them around their kids. We want their kids with somebody who wants to take care of them. We don't want to be in a position where we're forcing parents to take care of their kids, because then what we can predict is that they will do the absolute minimum of care that they can get away with without being arrested and imprisoned or something like that, right? And that's kind of what we have right now. We have a lot of really marginal parents who do the bare minimum because they don't want to lose their kids.
I guess I got Leslie to say anything.
I don't hear you.
I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Oh, change your speaker again.
Well, okay, yeah, that's right. I needed my speaker on. Listen, managing this is kind of tricky. I'm sorry, Leslie, try again. No, I still don't hear you.
I wonder what's going on. It was working fine just a little while.
Let me see if I've
Did
got.
you ever restart the video?
Yeah, I did. It's recording.
Once it's an hour and 16 minutes on my phone, so I never have it.
Yeah, that's because we never have it up.
Oh, you're the one who has to restart it.
Yeah, I just push record. It's just a recording of the
Also, the recording has to be an hour. Oh, okay.
Try again, Leslie.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you. What happened?
Oh,
How do
I
we
don't
do
know.
that?
That cleared things up, Frank. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for with me so that I can try to get these ideas across. Okay. So let's move on. Did you have anything else you wanted to bring up, Leslie?
Here, I have something.
You have something.
Yeah, pictures.
Hit my.
You're so this is for speaker
I'm
up
gonna
again.
mute myself.
And now she's not gonna be able to hear you next time you turn it back on. So I guess I was gonna give another real life example that I kind of relating to. I said, whenever I'm hearing him talk about this stuff, I'm trying to relate it to real life examples. And I think one that I can relate it to as far as punishing a parent for not taking care of their child. What I could think of is just, I'm right off Central here, and I've seen plenty of people on Central that don't look like they could take care of themselves, let alone a kid. So how could you hold them responsible for not taking care of their kid? Whenever they can't even take care of themselves, how are you going to punish them for that? There's no punishment for them, basically. Even morally. They're just, I don't know, that's kind of my opinion. That's the way I'm comparing it whenever he's saying things like that.
Yeah.
So, this brings up the question of crime and punishment. Great book, by the way, Dostoevsky. So in a libertarian society, would we have prisons?
I don't know. It's a hard one.
So here's Rothbard's approach in Ethics of Liberty, okay? And I haven't read this chapter recently, so maybe Leslie, you might want to chime in on this if you know more than I do. But basically, the libertarian approach to punishment is centered on restitution, making the victim whole again. Yeah. So in our current system, we punish people by imprisoning them, and sometimes by fining them. And that money commonly goes to the government, not the victim. Now, sometimes restitution is done, but the focus is on punishment, not restitution. Yeah? So in a libertarian society, the focus would be on restitution, not punishment. Now, there is an element of punishment in restitution, right? In the theory of restitution that originates in the Bible, restitution consists not only of returning what was taken from the victim, whether it was goods or, if they were injured or something like that, but also depriving the perpetrator of that, right?
Can you hear us? I can't hear her now.
She's nodding her head that she can hear. Okay, good. So with restitution, in the biblical version of restitution, if I say stole $100 from Daniel over here, restitution would be to return the $100 to him, but also to return another $100 to him, so that I was deprived of what I deprived him of. Do you get that? So that would be the theory of restitution. I would give double what I took. Okay, and that's Old Testament Bible stuff, I think. I don't really know the specifics of where that is. Don't ask me the chapter and verse, I don't know. But that's kind of the basic principle of restitution. And so none of that really, notice that none of that necessarily requires imprisonment or execution. Now, there are some crimes for which some restitution cannot be simply made. For instance, in the case of murder, I cannot restore my victim's life, the victim's life, right? That can't be done, okay? So how would restitution work in that case? I'm not sure how deep I need to go down this rabbit hole, but I can think of a few things that might work, okay? And one would be that, yes, the person who took the life owes his life. Yeah? Does it require a government to do that? Not necessarily. I would say that in the case of murder, the next of kin should have to do the execution, if that's what they want. If they have to, if an execution is decided upon by the next of kin, that the next of kin should be the one to actually have to do it. Now, I would suggest that a lot of people, if they actually had to perform the execution themselves, would not do it. They wouldn't want to, right? So they would have to deal with the hate and the resentment and the loss that's in their heart and decide whether or not to go through with such a thing. But here's an alternative. While restitution in whole may not be possible in the case of some crimes, that doesn't mean that some restitution can't be made. Yeah? So a murderer might agree to make some monetary compensation, right? In other words, this could be a negotiation between the next of kin and the perpetrator.
Could you make him your slave?
Right? Where the next of kin have the right to take that person's life, but not the obligation to do so. Yeah? They have the option to demonstrate compassion. They have the option to say require that the perpetrator make a contribution either to the family or to charity or something like that. So there's a lot of things possible besides punishment, putting them in prison or executing them. There's a lot of options. And in a libertarian society, some of those options would probably get exercised. Another thing about crime and punishment in a libertarian society is that there would be a free market in justice. So there would be multiple competing agencies that specialized in resolving disputes and providing justice. Instead of just one, there'd be multiple competing ones. And the idea there is that by having competition and multiple agencies operating in a free market, we provide incentives to provide better service at lower prices. Hearing somebody banging on our ceiling. Anyway, so a lot of questions come up about how that might work, but that's a kind of a basic principle, is that no one agency or group of people have a right to require us to arbitrate our disputes through their courts. Now, we already have, as Carrie Baldwin pointed out on the Telegram group today, we already have a lot of the infrastructure in place for this, right? We already have free market dispute resolution organizations. They're usually called mediators, right? And so they can't operate in some areas like criminal stuff right now because the government claims a monopoly on that. But the basic infrastructure for resolving disputes through non-governmental means is already there, through the free market is already there. We also have basic infrastructure for providing security and police functions, right? Because, I mean, the private security business is hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Yeah. So some of the security and police and justice functions are already being provided through the free market. All right. We're coming up here on 8 o'clock. So I am going to, well, before I move on back to monarchy versus democracy. Yes. Would you like to comment, anybody? Seeing nobody who wants to comment.
So basically,
Because basically right now, we live in a monarchy. Or a monarchy. What did you call it?
A minarchy.
A monarchy.
Yeah. No, we don't live in a minarchy.
You live in a monarchy. What do we
I
live
wouldn't call this a minarchist government. I'm not muted. So I don't think this is a minarchist government, right? A minimal government? No. It's more like a maximal government.
Yeah, I know, but one of the things you were saying about a monarchy is it's hard to keep a small government small,
Right.
which would
Well, we started out as a small government.
yeah, you can apply that to the way the world is today.
Yeah, well, America started out as a small government, for sure, right?
Okay, I understand it now.
Right, but it grew for some of the reasons that we talked about. Okay. All right, so let's look at monarchy versus democracy. The general argument is that democracy represents an advancement of civilization over monarchy, right? Like the idea is that because we have democracy, that's proof that civilization is advancing over monarchy. Yeah? Why? And one reason for that is the idea that in democracy, instead of a monopoly on government, we have free entry into government, right? So anybody, remember when you were a kid, anybody could become president. Yeah. You want to become president, Leslie? It's possible. Anyone can be president in a democracy, right? And this free entry into government is a good thing. But what is government? Government is the production of bads. We don't want free entry into the production of bads. We want free entry into the production of goods, right? If we were talking about organized crime, the mafia, do we want everybody to be able to join the mafia? No. We want everybody to be able to participate in the economy and markets, right? Everybody to be able to trade their labor and their ideas and their energy and their creativity and their passion and all that stuff, and make that work in voluntary cooperation with others to produce wealth, to produce culture, to produce goodness and truth and beauty. But what we have in the case of democracy is free entry into the production of evil. This is not a good thing. So democracy in this way is not an advancement, right? We want as few people as possible to be able to enter into government. The more people that can get into government, the worse it is. So free entry into the production of goods is good. Free entry into the production of bads is not good. All right, so let's look at another aspect of democracy versus monarchy. So in a monarchy, everybody knows that the king is basically just a thug, right? I mean, why is he king? He's king because he was the biggest, baddest guy, right? He kicked everybody else's rear end or whatever. You know, he was the most powerful. He had the best gunman or whatever. And so he's able to rule because he's the most efficient and effective criminal. Yeah. But in democracy, you have this illusion that because people are elected, that somehow they're not thugs, that they're legitimate. So democracy bestows a veneer of legitimacy upon the thugs. So is it good to have people deceived in this way that the people ruling them are actually good? Or is it better to have people understand and recognize and aware of that the people ruling them are what they really are? So
we're talking about democracy and them not being able to see that.
right, democracy hides the true nature of these people. The old saying is, we rule ourselves, right? We rule ourselves. Well, look, I don't rule myself. I can tell you that. If I was ruling myself, things would be different than they are.
Right.
Yeah? So, you know, this democracy confuses and veils the truth about government. Now let's look at another aspect of monarchy versus democracy. In monarchy, whether you have a good ruler or a bad ruler is largely just luck. It's the luck of the draw. You might wind up with somebody terrible. You might wind up with somebody who's just kind of a harmless dilettante, or you might wind up with somebody who's genuinely wise and benevolent. It's the luck of the draw. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get. But let's compare that to democracy. In democracy, who wins the election is the most efficient demagogue. A demagogue is somebody who appeals to people's emotions, their fear, their hate, their emotions. So in democracy, what gets you elected isn't whether you're a good ruler or not, but how well you manipulate the voters. Yeah? So if you can appeal to their fear, I will protect you from those terrible Taliban or, whatever. And also appeal to greed, in other words, I will rob from the rich and give it to you, right? Appeals to envy are one of the most popular things that demagogues do. Those rich people over there, they've been taking advantage of us for too long. It's time we took their wealth and gave it to everybody else, right? That's how the income tax got passed. Back in 1913, they said, y'all pay too much taxes. And we got all these really rich people over here. What we need to do is levy an income tax on the top 1%. and then we'll cut the tariffs, which will lower prices for everybody. I ask you now, the income tax is not just levied on the top 1% anymore, is it? And it wasn't going to be more than 2 or 3%, even on those people. So appeals to envy, appeals to greed, appeals to fear, appeals to hate. That's what gets a person elected. Listen to those politicians when they're talking to you. You'll hear these things. So with a monarchy, you get the luck of the draw, whatever it is. With democracy, you get the most efficient psychopath, the most efficient demagogue. That's who gets elected. So I ask you, is democracy actually an improvement over monarchy? It's not. Furthermore, in a monarchy, if you do get a bad ruler, the program is that, you rule until you die. So if you get a bad ruler in a monarchy, there is an incentive for his family to depose him, whether by killing him or other means. And this has happened many times. Why does the family do that? Because they know that if they don't take care of that bad king, there'll be a revolution. And the whole family dynasty will be lost. Right? So families have an incentive to get rid of a bad king. Keep it in the family, and then they can put someone else from the family up who's better, right? But they preserve the family dynasty that way. So they clean up their messes. In a democracy, you don't get that, because everybody knows, well, we'll just wait another 4 years and, there'll be another election and, so we'll get rid of the guy, right? So what happens is we get this whole long series of awful demagogues. Nobody ever does anything about it because they always know, hey, there's an election coming up in a few years. So, I think Biden's a good example. Biden is a guy who, if he was king, his family would remove him, right? Because he's obviously his brain is gone, right? He's senile, he's got dementia. Well, I don't know what exactly his problem is, but he can hardly string a sentence together, right? So in a monarchy, his family would move in and get rid of him and put somebody else up there. But the way it's going to work in democracy is we might have to live with this idiot for 4 years. Okay, so finally, the idea of the monarch as the nominal owner of his kingdom versus what a democratically elected leader is. So I'm going to use an example here, Leslie. Let's just say that I had a house up there in Farmington. And I said, Leslie, I'm going to give you the use of this house for 4 years. You can do anything you want with it, but you can't sell it. Okay? At the end of 4 years, I'm going to take it back. Doesn't matter what shape it's in or anything like that. I mean, you can do anything you want with it. But I have to be able to take it back in 4 years, so you can't sell it. So what would you do with that property? How would you treat that property? Would you treat it with a lot of tender, loving care? Or would you try to make the most use of it you could?
Rent it out.
Yeah, go ahead. You don't, I can't hear you. All right. Well, here, I can't hear you, so I'm going to just go ahead and say what I want you to say, okay? Which is that this is my favorite part of being a class leader, right? I can just say what I want people to say. But I would say that you would probably rent out the house to lots of people. Yeah. So, if it had 3 bedrooms, you might rent out like at least 2 people per bedroom or whatever. So you rent the house out to 6 people. Maybe you'd rent it out to 12 people or 24 people or something, right? And collect as much money as you could. Yeah. And how much money would you spend on upkeep and maintenance? Well, as little as you possibly could, right? Because you can do anything you want with the house. You're not responsible for its condition. It's just that at the end of 4 years, I get it back. So this is kind of like a democratically elected leader. He doesn't own the country, right? He's just the temporary caretaker, right? So what is his incentive is to get as much out of it in his term as he possibly can for him and his people, his allies, his friends, right? Whereas what is a king's incentive? A king owns the kingdom, right? He's more like me. So it's my house. I'm going to take care of it. Why? Because if I don't, if I rent it out to 40 people, well, it'll ruin my property, right? So I might get a little short-term gain, but in the long run, I will lose. So the incentives in democracy are that of a renter, right? Or somebody who is not even paying rent, but just the use of the property. Whereas the incentives under monarchy are the incentives of an owner. So an owner wants to preserve the capital, to take care of the property. He wants to extract wealth from it, but he doesn't want to extract so much wealth from it that it diminishes the value of it, right? So it's like he wants the interest, but he doesn't want to dig into the principal. He wants the rent, but not at the expense of the value of the property, right? So these are the different incentives under democracy. So now I'm going to I put the question to you, are we more likely to have a world that works for everyone under democracy or under monarchy?
Put that way, it'd be monarchy.
So you want me to say it?
No, I'm honestly asking you. Anybody who wants to chime in, I'm sorry I can't hear you, Leslie, but can you get her going?
Leslie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah. There she is.
I can't hear anybody now. You can hear me?
I hear you, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I would say monarchy would be best, and that with that perspective.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
You're still muted.
So I'm not saying there's no guarantee that a monarchy will go well, right? It can be a disaster. Absolutely, history demonstrates this. But the thing is that democracy is guaranteed to go badly. Monarchy might go well or might go badly. Democracy is guaranteed to be a long, slow ride to hell.
Yeah, so I guess I'll agree with you and say that democracy is a de-evolution of society.
De-evolution is the word I often use for democracy. And so if this is the trend, then we can say that civilization is actually going downhill, not uphill. And this means that, you know, what we're doing here in this course is important. Because without the right principles and values and ideas, we don't have any hope to turn this around. I mean, as long as we think that democracy is the way to go when it's really not, all we do is when democracy continues to not work, what do? We do it harder. We just do it harder. And of course, the harder we do it, what happens? The worse it gets. And so we do it even harder. I mean, this could result in ultimately the complete loss of civilization. I don't think people realize that civilization is really a fragile construct. It wouldn't take that much to destroy it. All it would take is war. That's all. War on a sufficient scale. And I don't know any entity that can conduct a war quite like a government. And in fact, they are the only entities that conduct war anymore. And they do it as I said earlier, that ratchet effect, that war is actually, a famous guy, Randolph Bourne, said, war is the health of the state. Right? I mean, the best thing for a state is to be at war because it accretes power, it accretes wealth, and it accretes the esteem of its citizens. Because it goes to the citizens and says, if you support me, I'll protect you in this war. You must support me. We must win this war. Demagoguery. Appeal to fear. Okay, let me have a look at my thing here. So I'm going to ask you a question. Do governments have a right to exist?
Yes.
Right.
Do they?
Right.
Yeah, under natural law, do governments have a right to exist? Does any group of people have rights as a group?
As a group? No.
No. Rights inhere in the individual, right? They belong to the individual, right? A man-made group of people, whether they call themselves the Elks Lodge or the Red Cross or ExxonMobil or the government of the United States of America, those are man-made things. They don't have the rights that God gave human beings because God didn't create them. We did. So no group of people has rights, right? Disabled people, they don't have special rights. I mean, they do nominally under the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? They have special, all that, but that's all wrong. That's all wrong. There's only one set of rights, and they're the same for every human being. So if a government is overthrown or deleted or negated, does that violate the non-aggression principle?
No, because there are no rights.
That's right. What is the non-aggression principle? Let's make sure we are all on the same page here.
It's no unjust use of force or
It's wrong to initiate force or threaten to initiate force against another person, right? And I think it's fair to add fraud to that. So it's also wrong to perpetrate fraud against another. So that's it, right? There's nothing in there that gives a government a right to exist. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." All right. Well, we're just about up to 8:30. I am going to go ahead and push it right to the end. So you're going to get full value for money tonight, okay? Full value.
We're all renters.
Full value for money, all right? So one of the things that's used to justify government and the abrogation of our rights is the social contract theory. So the social contract theory says that our well-being, our happiness, and even our rights arise from or are limited by our agreement to form a society, and that limitations upon our natural rights in service of society are justified. Under this theory, we have an obligation to obey laws we believe are immoral, because by doing so, we contribute to a societal order from which we all benefit, and which would be impossible without that obedience. While we do have a choice to leave the society, by staying, we implicitly agree to the social contract. Social contract asserts a reciprocation, that by accepting the benefits of society, we're obligated to contribute obedience to its laws, more or less regardless of what those laws are. Now, where did this all start? This all started, you've all heard of good old Socrates, right? So Socrates agreed to stay in prison and accept the death penalty rather than escape and go into exile. He was given the option to go into exile, but he chose to stay in prison and accept the death penalty because he believed in the social contract theory. So he said he's acquired an overwhelming obligation to obey the laws because they have made his entire way of life and even the fact of his very existence possible. They made it possible for his mother and father to marry and therefore to have legitimate children, including himself. Having been born, the city of Athens, through its laws, then required that his father care and educate him. Socrates' life and the way in which that life has flourished in Athens are each dependent upon the laws. And so, because he has received the benefit, he owes the duty of obedience. That's the social contract theory. So under the social contract theory, if the law says you must turn over part of your income to the government, You have to do it. Even knowing that your income is your own property, right? So we have here the idea that your rights are superseded by the social contract theory. So what's wrong with the social contract theory? Why is this not valid in libertarianism? Why do we not owe the government our obedience?
The government has no rights. No.
All right, so be sure and open your mic.
What was the question again?
Under libertarian political philosophy, why is the social contract not?
It's not valid because you're sacrificing your rights to government.
Okay.
Well, you're sacrificing your rights. I thought your rights were inalienable.
Yeah, I thought so too. Anyone else? Okay, so I've got about 5 minutes. Let me take apart the social contract theory for you. Okay? So let's look at the social contract theory. So we're keeping in mind what government is the ultimate, the group or agency that claims to be the ultimate arbitrator of all disputes in a given geographical area. Yeah? Including disputes that it is a party to. And as a corollary of that, it sets the price for that so-called service of being the arbitrator of all disputes, right? It's going to set the price for that service, if you want to call it a service. Yeah? So now let's look at a contract. Say you take out a loan to buy a car. Now in that loan agreement, first of all, it's all written out, isn't it? In excruciating detail. In fact, it'll take you quite a while to read it. So the social contract is not written out, is it? Did you ever get a copy of the social contract in the mail? I never did. So here's the deal with a social contract. The social contract is whatever the ultimate arbitrator of all disputes in a given geographical area says it is. So if you went to take out a loan in a car and they said to you, here's the deal on the loan. The terms of the loan are whatever we say they are. I mean, are you going to do that deal? I don't think so. Furthermore, not only whatever they say they are, but they can change those terms whenever they want, however many times they want. Would you sign such a contract? Would you sign a contract where they said, we'll set the terms of the agreement, we'll change it whenever we want, and if you have a dispute with us about what those terms are, we will be the arbitrator of that dispute? No. Here's why there's no social contract, people. Because only a lunatic would sign such a deal. Nobody in their right mind would sign such a deal. And by the way, it is established law that if you're not in your right mind and you do sign, it's invalid because you weren't in your right mind. So there's no social contract. There can't be. The reason you never got a copy of the social contract in the mail is because they know if you ever read such a thing, you would never sign it.
It's like a psychological operation.
All right. 3 minutes for comments, and I'm going to mute. Floor is open.
Just interesting perspective. Oh, I've gotten a different perspective on this tonight. Because I actually was I watched what was it, anyway, a webinar kind of thing where the guy explained that we've come from, you know, monarchy to democracy, so freedom has kind of taken a linear path, because each time, you know, people get fed up with monarchy and they get rid of it, so then they have some freedom, but then another tyrannical government comes along, and so tyranny goes up and down and up and down, but freedom has gone linearly up continuously. But when you put it that way, the way you explained it, I'm like, you know, that's totally different.
Okay, anything else?
That's all I had to say.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not endorsing monarchy here,
Yeah.
right? I'm not a monarchist. I'm simply pointing out that in many respects, at least in some respects, democracy is worse, much worse than monarchy. And I think that point is really hard to refute. Okay, anybody else want to make a comment? Go.
I guess I kind of didn't learn anything new tonight, other than the fact I know how to classify things a little bit better. And yeah, I kind of just feel like I'm pretty much still in line with libertarianism, and yeah, I'm just kind of I've always kind of felt this way about the world that I live in, and now that I've never been political or about terms of things. I've kind of always just learned things intuitively, I guess. But now I'm kind of trying to get into these politics and get into terms and more into history and why the world is the way it is, not just because it's evil or good, but how and what makes it that way. So that's why I'm here, and it's been fun, and I'm looking forward to more, pretty much. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel. Aurea. Well, I'm not calling on people. You don't have to share here, but I would love it if you would. Sure.
I guess it was more of just learning more of the perspective of libertarianism. Like, I've never heard anybody explain abortion that way, like having an advocate kind of for both sides, right? Because usually it's either or, either you're for the mom or you're for the fetus, the baby, right? That's usually how the argument goes. So that was a really interesting perspective to hear.
Right. See, that's one reason I like that argument, is because it takes from both sides, good things from both sides, and attempts to create something where we might have some agreement, you know, in an issue in which agreement is as scarce as hen's teeth. I mean, let's face it. I mean, people are so upset and so polarized by this stuff. And, you know, I'm not saying that the ideas that Walter Block's ideas solve all the problems. No, they don't. But, you know, I think it's a beginning to bring a level of rationality to it, to the argument. So, and that's kind of why I was interested in it. I wanted to add something about the social contract before we went, but I forgotten now what it was. So it'll have to wait till next time. We are going to meet again in 2 weeks at the same time and place. And One of the topics we'll be looking at will be the future of civilization and freedom. So we'll be trying to look out into the future and seeing what might be out there and what our role might be, and what we can do to, create a world that works for everyone. So thank you very much for attending tonight. I've enjoyed your company immensely. There's nothing I can think of that I'd rather be doing tonight. So I love all of you and appreciate you very much. And if you have feedback or you want to chat about this course with me, feel free to reach out to me personally. I'd be more than happy to speak to you. Otherwise, I'll see you in 2 weeks.